Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for a link to my Amazon store where I've compiled some of the very best items available, including some of my own personal recommendations. Thanks! What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got a special video for you. This is not a knife review. Rather, we're going to be talking about a new variant of a knife that I recently handled, and then by complete and utter blind luck, am able to handle a brand new variant of it. This is a Holt Specter, but not a V3. It's actually a V4. And the V4 change, according to my friend at Herms Things on Instagram, please give him a follow. It's because of him that I'm able to even handle this, and he actually won it in a lottery. So talk about like double, like blue moon planet aligning luck that I've got this in my hands right now. But he sent this to me for review, so please give him a follow. This is a V4 with a liner lock. So for those of you who have not seen my review on this knife, you're welcome to go back. It was fairly recent. In fact, I have it in my most recommended knives playlist and my favorite knives of all time playlist, where you can find it pretty easily. There have been some changes to the Specter, over time, from V1 to V2, which I've never handled. There were a few things. Some milling done, some corners knocked down. I think Nick Shabazz covered that really, really well. And actually, that's when I first, I believe the very first time that I saw a Specter was in the same day, Nick Shabazz and Jim Skelton. And from many reviewers, you're going to hear a lot of high praise. There's been a lot of really good things said about this knife. So if you're interested in hearing all that, you can check out mine or some of those other reviews. But I'm not going to be going over all that today. We're going to be talking about some my personal feelings about this knife and just the culmination of everything. So if you've been around for a while on my channel, you'll know kind of what my tastes are, and we all have different tastes, right? We all go down unique paths. Those of you who watch my Knife Guy series on Sundays, you've heard me say that before, and we sort of have our own expectations by price range. We develop our own value system, and then we have our own preferences, right? Nobody's necessarily right or wrong when it comes to preferences. They're preferences, right? I dedicated a couple of series actually to going over every last minute detail in considering all folding knives, what I consider to be perfect for me, and then also considering budget knives. And I go into as in depth as I possibly can, because like a lot of people who do what I do, which is review knives on YouTube, we have this unique opportunity to handle a lot of things, right? And so I've handled an enormous amount of knives. And there's a lot of people out there who have handled as many or more knives than me who are not knife reviewers, but I have handled a lot in a lot of different price ranges and I'm very fortunate. But the more knives that you handle, especially if you're handling really expensive knives, you get really specific on what you expect. Now, I'm really positive on my channel. I don't like being negative. I'll point out things that I consider to be, minor flaws, but I always try to glass half full it and say, hey, listen, sometimes it's an adaptation process. If you really want this object to be a part of your everyday life, then you'll likely adapt to it. It's pretty rare that I point something out and say, this is an absolute flaw, it's terrible, and I hate it. Right? And that's a lot of the reason that there's so much positivity on this channel, is because I'm really picky about the stuff that comes into the channel. I don't want to review things that I don't think that I'll like, because number one, the energy won't be there, the enthusiasm won't be there, and that's what I really like. I like to be enthusiastic about knives that I actually enjoy. The Specter V3, the very first one that I handled, was a knife that I not only enjoyed, but absolutely blew my mind. Many of you know that my favorite folding knife of all time, something that I've crowned Excalibur, actually, which the word represents, it's actually the sword that's in my logo. It represents the ideal folding knife for any individual. And my Excalibur has been the Hinderer XM18, specifically this version here with textured titanium. It's got the M390 blade. It's got the tri-way system. There are so many elements that I look for in a folding knife that I have found in this Hinderer XM18. And for however long, despite me being very positive on this channel and always, finding the good and the benefits, weighing out the pros and cons, that knife has always been above and beyond. And there are a lot of knives that have come close or, arguably have nearly matched the XM18 in my book. But when I handled the Specter V3, it truly was a different experience. Number one, initially, the knife was bigger than I thought it was going to be. The first time I saw the Specter, I thought, it looks awesome, it's beautiful, but it might be a little small. This is a full-size knife. It's a thin knife. It's got an excellent carry profile, right? It's not a huge knife, but it's a full-size knife. In fact, we'll go ahead and measure it for those of you who don't want to go back and watch the other review. We're coming in at just a hair over 8 inches, 8.15, something like that. Blade length's coming in at about 3.6. Actual cutting edge is coming in at about 3.5 on the dot. Wonderful. Wonderful blade to handle ratio. And then on top of that, it's the excellence of this knife is further exemplified by its completely reasonable 3.95 ounces of weight. That's going to hit the nail on the head for a lot of people. The combination of carry profile, blade to handle ratio, and general dimensions of this knife, right? It's not a thick knife. It's not a tall knife. I mean, up against the PM2 Para 3, right? We'll do our semi-usual thing. This is a little bit unorthodox. I show the PM2 and Para 3 because of their awkwardness in carry profile and their lack of any complaints about carry profiles, seemingly lack of complaints associated with them. You can see up against the PM2 there's your size comparison. Rat 1, we normally do that one first. Kind of speeding through this here to get to my main point. Up against the Benchmade Griptilian, or in this case the Ritter Hogue, can't leave that dialogue out. And then last but not least, of course, the Spyderco Para 3. So for many reasons, this fits a lot of what I look for. I like a knife that I can get my entire hand around, right? But I don't feel like I'm being confined to a specific place on the blade. I'm still able to move around. On top of that, I always look for things like, I don't like sharp edges. Nobody likes sharp edges, right? I like some contouring, which this has. I love a fully flat ground blade. In fact, many of you guys will remember my Quest for the Perfect Budget Knife series. Actually, the reason that I came to love the Rat so much is because of that flat ground blade and its utility. And then I've come, as much as I like the cool factor in a thick blade, I absolutely realize the benefit of a blade that is not overly thick because of its ability to, taper down to the cutting edge. Sorry about that. We're looking at, this is saying 136 thousandths. Let's go again, just to be sure, right here where it's actually flat, 130 thousandths or so. And then it tapers down to this amazingly, beautifully thin cutting edge, but you still have a reasonably robust tip, making it ideal for a number of different situations. It also has a 20 CV blade, which I think is appropriate on a knife like this that is not necessarily 100% geared towards hard use, but is not necessarily a gentleman's folder that's meant for delicate use, right? I mean, it's not necessarily the best at any one particular thing. The entire knife design is meant to meet the demands of somebody who is actually going to use a pocket knife fairly often, but enjoys premium materials, right? So there's a lot of work that goes into this knife, but I would say it's about 99% geared towards utility. Do we need titanium? Do we need 20 CV? I don't know. It depends on the individual. But if we're talking about, utilitarian materials being put together and all of the different things that go into making a pocket knife, making sure that the deployment is smooth, not necessarily just for the feeling of smoothness, but for the reliability of the deployment, right? Making sure that the handles are contoured, not necessarily because the contouring feels good. It does, but the main benefit of that is filling out the hand and sort of, complementing the already very ergonomic lines, right? So what I'm saying is that it is a benefit, the way that this knife is put together. There's a lot of aesthetic features. There's a lot of feely good features, right, that are secondary to the primary, design philosophy, which is, this is a tool. It's a very expensive and very hard to get tool, but it is a tool. And that's always something. As much as I love the Timascus and the cool, the wild designs, I love that and I appreciate it. But at the end of the day, when the novelty of a new knife purchase wears off, what you're left with is an object that is more or less of a tool. And I could imagine, it's hard for me to imagine owning one of these and the novelty actually wearing off. But I can say confidently that if that day ever came, if I purchased one of these and the day came where the novelty of it wore off and it was just the object that was in my pocket, it would serve in that role as better than anything else that I could possibly imagine. I'm going to go over why I think that. I mean, a lot of you know my sort of thing about hardware, right? We're actually looking at, I believe, I'll do my normal thing, handy dandy Wii bit selector, Wii magnetic driver, two items that are very inexpensive and very recommendable. You can find them down in my Amazon store by pulling it open and looking up knife maintenance. They're right down there, I believe, at the bottom. This is a T10 pivot, which is wonderful, nice large head. And then we have, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, T8 hardware. Let's check that real quick. Just trying to be real careful because I don't want to put any marks on this knife whatsoever. Yeah, T8 hardware everywhere, right? That's wonderful. On top of that, the hardware is minimal, right? There's two little pieces of little screws, pivot on each side. It's not a free spinning pivot. There's not even a screw in the outside of the pocket clip. It's actually hidden underneath. The inside of the titanium's milled out, right? Usual checklist. Check, 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 check. Everything, right? Even the stop pin situation, where people say, it doesn't have the external stops that you like. They're not external, but they function exactly the same way. The stops are actually located on the inside, but they actually rotate. It's hard for me to make this thing fail. I actually had to get my finger in the way there to get it to fail. Oh, that fall shut action. You can see there, the stop actually goes around on a slot milled into the titanium. So it functions exactly the same way as external stops that brace on the frame, which is nice for pressure mitigation away from the pivot if you're using the knife in a way that's not really something you would do with a knife, right? It's nice. It's not necessarily foolproof or stronger than a triad block for people wanting to point that out, but it's great, right? It's a fantastic design. Now, this is a liner lock. And by the way, it's actually, if you take a look in here, it's a titanium liner lock with what appears to be a steel lock bar insert at the top. You can see the little screw back there for the insert. So the lock itself is a little bit lighter than the seal lock, but it also has an insert. So that's nice. You gain the benefits of the insert. They didn't cut corners with that. It's more expensive to do it that way. So why are you emphasizing the liner lock complex? What's the deal with that? Well, so I love a frame lock. I mean, a frame lock is a very strong design. Now, the frame lock's weakest point is the relief cut. I have never seen a knife have so much pressure put on the back of the blade that it actually bends out the lock bar, meaning the lock bar actually goes further into the knife, and then the blade tang, the pressure on the back of the spine actually causes the contact between the blade tang and the lock to be so fierce, so much pressure there that it bends out at the relief cut. The reason I'm pointing that out is because the relief cut is basically, excuse me, about the same thickness as this liner lock. So while there is a little bit more surface contact in a frame lock, and you could make an argument that that's a little bit more secure, potentially, depending on what you're doing with the knife, the knife's weakest point in a frame lock is, arguably very nearly as strong. And I honestly can't, there's a million ways to argue this. I could be right or wrong about this, but in terms of the way that 80% of the people use their knives, I always say this, 80% of the people using pocket knives are using them for regular things, right? Package opening, light cutting, cardboard, breaking down, stuff like that. 20% of us are out there really beating on our knives and potentially doing things with knives that they're not meant to be used, or, not using knives in ways that they're not meant to be used, or, in ways that would require a fixed blade or perhaps a shovel, a hammer, a pry bar. And then less than 1% of people are jumping out of helicopters or using their knives as a grappling hook, right? Scaling buildings. That's nonsense. So they are, again, this is a step in the direction of utility, right? Or common use utility. Here's the other thing, the main thing that I think most people can agree on. On a frame lock, you have to train yourself to keep your hands off of the lock bar. If your hands are over here and you're putting pressure on it, then it doesn't deploy the same way. It might make it tighter, right? And in that situation, a lot of times when you hand off a frame lock to somebody who's not used to it, they're like, why won't it open? In the case of the hinder, that flipper tab's pointy, right? Many times that's happened with new people. And yeah, it's like I always say, there's an adaptation process. You get used to it, right? In the case of this guy, because the entire, non-show side, or the back, as I always joke, non-show side, you can put as much pressure on it as you want. It's the exact same deployment every single time. It doesn't matter what finger you use to flip it, right? And that's further exemplified by the fact that this knife has perfect action. It's literally fall shut on a blade that is not super thick. It is unbelievably reliable and unbelievably solid, right? It's absolutely solid. No blade play up, down, left, or right. perfectly centered. The lockup is perfect. The detent is perfect with no wiggle, right? There's no blade play or detent play. It's perfect. On top of that, this, for me, is really being pushed into the zone of perfection by the fact that it's all monochromatic. And a lot of people like color. And here's the thing with Holt. You can get whatever you want. If you actually are in line for a knife, you can choose the style of hardware, the color of hardware, the pattern that's on the handle texturing, right? You can choose a whole bunch of different things. Have you ever seen Nick Shabazz's Damasteel one with the Damasteel bolster? I mean, there's a bunch of different options, right? So you can get what you want. This is my flavor. In fact, the only thing that I would have changed about this knife, literally everything, is exactly the way that I do it, except I would have gone with his diamond or his texture pattern rather than this sort of, this is still beautiful and it's still textured titanium and it's very pleasing to the eye and to the touch, right? It's wonderful, but I would have gone with the diamond texture, but that's irrelevant. And then the tumbling on the blade is wonderful. The actual edge, the finished part of the edge, is just wonderful. What I'm getting at here is that this is the first time. I mean, I crowned the XM18 Excalibur a while back, and there have been a lot of other candidates, but I found little tiny things here or there that I would change. And this all potentially can be different, on each individual knife. Like most of the time I prefer a forward choil, but a lot of you have heard me say, if the design accentuates the blade enough where there's no need for a forward choil, generally, if your fingers get close enough to the cutting edge that it's not necessary and there's nothing in the cutting path, and there's not necessarily a need for a forward choil that would take away from usable cutting edge, which in this case is just, again, the ratio is just amazing. So this isn't a design that I really would think needs that forward choil. This is generally on my checklist. So that's cleared, and then everything else, literally everything else that I want in the knife is there. I mean, including cool factor, which is, funny enough, almost ironically, the cool factor in this knife is just the end result of a design that is so perfectly built in the light of utility that it just has to be there. It just comes with it. It's a package deal, right? And again, this isn't going to be for everybody. And I am not the absolute law on what perfect means. I'm still a very small channel in the massive ocean that is YouTube, and even just the specific corner that is the knife world, right? So my word's not law, and I definitely don't know everything. In fact, there's so much left to experience that I couldn't possibly hope to cover even half of it in my entire life. But based on everything that I've handled, everything that I've seen, and again, my channel being glass half full, very positive, I'm very particular about knives that I will call Excalibur. In fact, there's only ever been one on this channel, and that was the XM18. And my complaint with it was if there was some contouring on the scales and maybe they fixed a couple of things like the jimping and, on the back and the sharpness of the flipper tab, then, maybe I would be able to call it perfect. But it's Excalibur at this point because it's the closest thing to perfection that I've ever seen. I still love the XM18, and I will always love the XM18. One of the main reasons I'm going to keep loving it as much as I do is because it's available. I can keep getting it. In terms of just the build on this knife and what it is now, in the inclusion of this liner lock, and it didn't take me long to realize this. It was, in fact, the evening that I received this, sitting and playing with it on the couch. And a lot of people are going to roll their eyes. They're like, you're about to say what I think you're going to say, and it's based on sitting and flipping on the couch. Yeah, it is. It is. I've handled and used enough folding knives that I'm confident, at least in my ability to decide for myself whether or not something is usable, right? Different for every single person, but so with all that in mind, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but this is the first time on this channel that, number one, I'm actually going to crown a knife Excalibur over the Hinder XM18. This is in every sense of the word, to me, Excalibur, which again represents the perfect knife for an individual, the individual in this case being myself. And I would venture to guess that a lot of people would consider the Holt Specter, even the V3, to be, their Excalibur, but it's different for everybody. But also, this is a big thing. This is something I've never done on this channel, never said on this channel. At over 850 uploads at the time of this video, this knife is truly flawless. It's literally perfect. I cannot find an actual flaw or anything on this knife that I would change, right? Now, I've kind of tiptoed around saying that on some other models, right? Like, oh, looking at this model, like, it's not a shape that I would really like. It's not a deployment feature that I prefer over this or that, or it's not this or that I would prefer. But in terms of what they created, it doesn't have any flaws. I've said that before, specific to that knife. But this knife is perfect in terms of every last little thing that I could possibly nitpick about a knife that I would want for myself. I could not, if I sat down and put all of my effort into creating something that I thought was perfect for me, I couldn't put this on paper with pencil, right? I couldn't draw it. Like, it's literally perfect. This is the most perfect folding knife that I've ever handled. It's two things that are going to hold people back from getting their hands on this is, number one, it's really expensive. If you're actually lucky enough to win a lottery, because the books are closed on these guys, you got to win a lottery just to be able to buy it, either through Instagram or on their website, which is what happened with Herms things. Very, very unlikely. And then if you do win it, you're going to pay table price, which is $700, which in my experience with everything that I've handled, which again, there's a lot of really great budget knives on this channel that I've reviewed between the $20 and $50 mark that I love. And there's a lot of knives on this channel that I've reviewed that are well over $1,000. In one case, there was a $2,500 knife on this channel that I really liked. And I, in some sense or another, can see the value in, or why some people might pay that much money for that object. But what I'm getting at is, to me, yes, $700 to me here is pretty easy to see. There are knives that compete with this knife in quality that cost $200, $300, $400 more, that have the exact same types of materials and don't dip into the hyper exotic Timascus and Mokutai and superconductor and Damacor and all that stuff, right? So the value's there. But again, the thing that's going to hold people back from getting their hands on this is the fact that it's just unavailable. That is the only flaw with the knife is not a physical flaw, it's availability. But yeah, that's where I am with this. This is wonderful. I don't think that there is a lot of information on the Specter V4 out there, so I do thank, again, at Herms Things for letting me take a look at this. It feels really strange to say this. I honestly never thought I would get to a point where I would actually find the bar, right? I mean, I always thought that I would be continuously setting the bar higher and higher for myself based on the things that I handled and the things that I discovered. Now, that's not saying that I'll never discover a knife that I consider to be as perfect or more perfect than this, right? It depends on what I experience in the future. If I'm presented with new things, right, then I have a new set of standards. But as far as my standards go right now and what I look for in a folding knife, this checks every single box, and it is wonderful. For those of you who are not interested in this price tier, that's perfectly fine. I hope that you found enjoyment just, by watching. I hope you're just generally entertained by it. For those of you who have been existing around the $200, $300, $400, $500 mark, and you're considering spending a little bit more money and wondering, does it get better? Well, better is a funny word, but in my opinion, yes, actually, you actually could spend some more money and get what I would consider to be perfection, and it does exist in the Holt Specter V4. The V3 is still wonderful, and their bolster lock version, I would imagine I would like just as much, close to as much as about this, but I really, really love the fact that I don't have to use the tiniest brain cell, to think about the deployment or where my hands are positioned. I can simply pull this knife from my pocket, which, by the way, did I mention the way that this carries the pocket clip design? I mean, the entire aesthetic of the knife is so just, it's simplistic minimalism that takes the form of something that is far more complex than those words, right? It sounds like I'm being intentionally poetic. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to take this feeling in my mind and my soul and apply it to this thing that just cuts. That's the funny thing about this is I'm going on 24 minutes right now, just pouring my heart out in this overview of an object that in its base form, it's just a pocket knife, but this is an amazing pocket knife. I'm blown away. Officially, this is the greatest folding knife that I have ever shown here on the Metal Complex channel, and it will actually be named the current Excalibur. Now, it will go in the playlist with my quest for the perfect folding knife alongside the Hinder XM18, which is after the conclusion, and any knife in the future that I deem Excalibur will also go in that playlist. But just officially, and the knife that's at the bottom of that playlist will be the current channel Excalibur. It's kind of sad that, you know, it doesn't apply to the Hinderer anymore. We'll see what Hinderer comes up with, because he's certainly capable of, you know, continuously checking those boxes for me, as well as, you know, a lot of other makers, and probably knives that I've never handled. But that will be the case. It'll also go in my favorite folding knives of all time playlist, as well as my most recommended knives. I cannot recommend this enough to people who are ready to spend this type of money on a knife. It's, you know, the enjoyment is further accentuated by the fact that if you do actually get your name on the books in the future, you can get the version of this knife that is perfectly suited to yourself, you know, with a combination of hardware color, handle scale, sometimes materials and color and texturing and blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on, but I don't think there's a whole lot of you still watching here at the 25-minute mark, so I'm going to go ahead and end this. Thank you again at Herms Things for letting me experience this. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I don't like. So check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on this metal complex logo right here and subscribe, because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have